Good morning to those listening, and welcome to the Design Leaders podcast. Every day, I speak with candidates looking to grow in the world of design, development, and construction. I also speak with leaders at the peak of their careers who regularly talk about mentorship and helping the next crop of leaders in their development. How can we help professionals reach their goals in a small but growing industry? Each episode, I want to provide a great opportunity for professionals of all levels to learn from market and thought leaders about avenues for development, areas of focus, how to speak about their project experience, and over time, help guide other professionals in their longer term goals and motivations. Today, I'm here with Jackson Metcalf and Kelly Westwood, leaders and members of the Gensler Critical Facilities team. Jackson's been with Gensler about 17 years now and is now the co-lead of the Critical Facilities practice globally. Kelly's been with Gensler about 8 years now and is now the regional practice area lead for Critical Facilities. Jackson, Kelly, I really appreciate you both coming on the episode and welcome. No problem. I always start these podcasts the same way. So if you don't mind, a question for the two of you. Firstly, how and why did you both get into architecture and design in the first place?
That's kind of a tough one for me to answer. My parents are both artists, and as a child, I probably had a lot of affinity toward building and experimentation with pretty much anything. And from a relatively early age, I think I had decided that I either wanted to design airplanes or buildings. And airplanes require a lot more math, so this was probably a better choice. But I honestly can't think of a better career. It's really a rewarding, very fulfilling career track.
And for me, it's funny actually, when I was an infant, my parents built their first home. And I love this photo of my mom with my two older sisters and me in the house with like just the framing up. So I think I was kind of born into it in some ways. And when I was in second grade, they built their second home. And I remember being there with my grandfather while it was under construction, getting stuck in the mud, trying to take a picture of a duck. And so I think I just kind of got stuck, and here I am today. But it's been an incredible journey.
Interesting. It sounds like you're both almost born into the profession, it sounds like. And then
it's probably the stock answer that you would get out of just about anyone in the profession. Most people will say that, from a very young age, so we're no different.
Interesting. Now, Jackson, specifically for you, having spent 17 years with Gensler, how do you feel about spending such a large bulk of your career working on critical facilities?
Well, I don't know how everyone gets into critical facilities. I got into it week number 2 at Gensler. I joined Gensler right out of college, and the first week is like most people's first week. I worked on a lot of different things to kind of get onboarded, and week number 2, there was an opportunity with a project just starting up for a very large financial institution's data center on the East Coast. And, I ended up seeing that project through to completion over the course of the next 3 years, and ended up designing quite a few others. And the practice, critical facilities, data center design, the practice has been a really great growth area, I think, for a lot of people. What's kind of unique about it is it's a very small industry in the larger architecture, design, and construction industry. So if people are willing to kind of give it a chance, it's pretty interesting. There's a lot of opportunity for quick growth, I think, for people, because it is such a small group of folks who do this work, whether they're architects, engineers, contractors, even on the client side. So there definitely is a need for more people in it, which means that it can usually lead to a lot of upward growth pretty quickly. The other thing that I think is really great, and it's going to be different for engineers. I actually do want to say something about the engineers too. But on the architecture side, what I find kind of fascinating is that a lot of times, especially in larger firms, people are worried about, oh, I'm only going to work on one sort of thing. I might get pigeonholed. The old thing I heard when I was going to college was, oh, if you go to a big firm, you're going to be designing bathrooms for your first 10 years. It's not the case with data centers. Data centers have a little bit of everything. It's new. A lot of them are new construction architecture on greenfield sites or whole campuses. There's envelope design. There's heavy coordination with engineers who oftentimes happen to be some of the best in the marketplace too. And there's interior design, there's signage and branding and graphics. There's a little bit of everything that we experience in architecture in these projects. So especially what kept me as a younger person when I was getting started was I got to learn all those different things, whether it was the early site planning, conceptual design phases and things like that, building massing, all the fun design stuff that we like to do, through full documentation of the design to construction. And a lot of times it meant sticking with the project for 2, 3, 4 years, which was really a wonderful way to learn what we do in architecture and design. But kind of going to the engineers for a second, a lot of times engineering for commercial design and everything like that, may not be the most prestigious thing. A lot of times engineers want to be in pipelines or aerospace and things like that. Data centers for mechanical, electrical, plumbing engineers are like the A-list kind of building design construction projects. This is their Willis Tower, Shanghai Tower. Like these are the hardest engineering projects that they'll get, and it means we get really spoiled. We get to work with some of the absolute best engineers in the marketplace doing data centers, and it's a lot of fun. You end up learning a lot about how buildings work, just because of the sheer talent we get to work with.
Absolutely.
Interesting. And for those that may not be altogether too clear, a fairly simple question, but could you explain what is a critical facility and why are these buildings so important?
Do you want to take it, Kelly?
You could.
Okay. So critical facilities, mission critical facilities, whatever we want to call them. Generally, I think it's lumped into the idea of its 24/7 operation. They tend to require a high level of resilience. Historically, a lot of the ones early in my career, and prior to that, they were built using extremely robust and resilient systems. I think today there's more of the resilience is through more innovative processes of multiple campuses. So rather than focus on one building being able to survive a direct hit from a hurricane and all this, it's less of the focus. It's more of distributing the resiliency across the geography itself, or with intelligent network switching and things like that allow multiple facilities to kind of back each other up. There's still a lot of robustness to the engineering design regardless. Today they're more resilient than your average commercial building. But it may not be what it was when I started my career in 2006. So critical facilities for us are usually going to be data centers is by far the biggest piece of this for what we do at Gensler. And a lot of our competitors who are in the same arena, data centers is the big piece. In addition to data centers, there's very, very closely related projects. High performance research supercomputing centers, those are very, very much a data center, but slightly different. There's command and control centers, which are pretty amazing. That's kind of like a data center meets high-tech workplace. Those are fun projects. We used to do broadcast studios out of critical facilities because it may be hard to fathom, because what you see on camera typically in a broadcast studio is just the front of house. The majority of modern broadcast studios are essentially a data center with a small on-camera portion. So we used to do that. We have a separate practice that's media that actually does broadcast studios now. They were an offshoot of Critical Facilities in a way. We also recently launched, our firm recently launched industrial and logistics as a practice. And that was something that we kind of got off the ground in our Critical Facilities team. Various types of logistics, high-tech industrial. Trying to think if there's any other kind of classics that fall under the Critical Facilities umbrella. Sometimes it's also just projects that don't fit anywhere else. If it's unique, we usually end up kind of agreeing to take it on.
Well, but to summarize and to borrow a phrase that a lot of people like to use is critical facilities are projects that can't fail. And they have, really significant impact beyond just the immediate users of the building facility. It really impacts the community, a region, and sometimes beyond that.
Thank you for that, guys. And now back to discussing your own development and your own growth for the both of you, and at two different stages in your career. It'd be an interesting take. How do you feel as though your leadership, we're talking here now at Gensler with 17 and 8 years at Gensler. How do you feel like your leadership in the early years of your careers would have described you both as professionals?
Why don't you go first?
I was one of those people who just could figure things out, put my head down and really dive into an issue and a problem. And sometimes it was solving problems that we didn't even know we had. So, I think that's how most people would have described me early on as a problem solver, someone who was really willing and excited to roll up her sleeves and dive in.
There's probably a lot of different ways I would have been described early in my career. One of our managing principals for the Chicago office, I remember probably 2 or 3 years in, we were having our annual PDP, professional development program. It's not like a performance review, it's a different conversation. It's about your own personal growth and development. And I remember he said, what I like about working with you is that if I have a sketch and I say, here's kind of what I want to do, you come back to me with like 3 other ideas and say, well, I can't do that, but here's 3 different ways that I think we can make what you're trying to achieve work. That's probably one of the better stories I have from early on in my career. I think, trying to look back on it, it's like there's similar to Kelly. I probably was best described as someone who could kind of figure out a lot of different things. And if it was building a presentation, creating some visualization, working on drawings, going on a site visit, I could usually figure it out. So well-rounded probably is the simplest descriptor.
Mm-hmm. But I think, they're not altogether that different, those two. I think you're both kind of describing yourselves as problem solvers. Do you feel as though the knack of being a problem solver is kind of what pushed you in the direction of critical facilities, or is just a happy coincidence?
I'd say it's probably more a happy coincidence. I think all designers are problem solvers. I think we just have, maybe a different type of problem to solve in critical facilities.
I think for me, it comes down to, I like the design process, and I've worked on quite a lot of work over the years that wasn't in the critical facilities realm, and it's kind of funny. Sometimes people in our side of the industry, the architecture and design side, sometimes people are kind of turned away from critical facilities because they're not necessarily heavily publicized projects in the same way that a new headquarters or something might be, and I think our projects appeal to people who enjoy the process of design, because the projects that I've done, some of the highest profile projects I've done, they're really great to have in a portfolio. But some of the best memories I have of projects are actually data centers that I've worked on that, we tour a client through 10 years later, and, I'm running into the people that were, working with us day in and day out on the design, and they're excited. They're like, how long has it been since I've seen you? And it's like, it's kind of great, you know. And so I think if you enjoy how we develop, you know, the design for something, to me, that's, it's a really great practice to be a part of.
It is, and our team too here in Chicago is a really great team, and it's certainly growing, and I think that's really exciting to be a part of. When I first came to Chicago, I was coming from our New York office, and I worked on a lot of different types of projects, you know, nothing in critical facilities, and you know, just working with this team and seeing how much like natural mentorship came with that. Jackson is someone who, you know, really does, you know, take the time to explain things to people and make sure that they understand what they're really working on. And that really, for me, was powerful, you know, as someone, you know, young or youngish in the industry and trying to find my way. That was really important to me to have that team and mentorship. So, like I said, it's exciting to, you know, see that grow and to see our team members grow along with it. And now kind of being more on the other end of the spectrum, you know, allows me to kind of give back to the team what I got from Jackson, you know, 4 years ago.
A lovely way of thinking that. And I think, Kelly, you've kind of, you know, segued quite nicely into my next question here, you know, fast forwarding from the early days of your career. And I know Kelly was kind of giving a bit of an overview of Jackson there, but I'd like to know how you both feel that your colleagues, your peers, your employees at this time would describe you as leaders.
I really am not entirely sure. I think I could venture a guess. I think I would hope that that people kind of view my leadership style as authentic and hands-on in a good way. I don't mean hands-on in a micromanaging way. I mean hands-on as in trying to keep a sense of what's going on in projects, within teams, be very much aware of all that's going on. And you know, if I were to tell kind of an anecdote, I remember very early in my career, one of my mentors, who's retired now, you know, we would run into each other in the elevator on the way in from work, and he'd ask me about a project that we were working on that I hadn't talked with him about for 3 months, and he's remembering these various things. And I remember asking him one day, I said, so does everybody in this industry, like once they get a certain amount of experience, just have like this amazing photographic memory of various projects? Or is that just you? And he's like, you'll have it. You know, it's just time and experience. And I think that that's definitely something as I've gotten older, that I feel like hopefully that's something people see as a value, is that I do try and, you know, be able to retain what's going on the countless projects we're involved with, and, you know, various clients and all that, so that when our colleagues do have a question or they need guidance and advice, even if I haven't been sitting in every one of the meetings, that I can at least kind of shed some light on what I think the right approach is, or things like that.
He's being humble. As someone who, you know, has learned so much from Jackson over the years, you know, he's one of those people who really does guide and mentor individuals, and, you know, he's kind of, what do you call it? You always talk about like kind of being the guide rails to make sure that people stay on course. And I think that's really important. But I mean, one of the other big components is humility. I think a lot of times people think, oh yeah, I want to be a leader. And I think they need to really, you know, ask themselves why they want to be a leader. Is it because of title and status? And if so, it's probably something they need to reconsider. You know, but, you know, I think in our industry and certainly within our team, you know, staying humble and so being a leader is more about serving, you know, other individuals. It's not about, you know, sitting at the top of a mountain and kind of enjoying and taking in the view. It's really about being a pioneer and forging pathways and creating opportunities for other people, and then shepherding them along that path. So I think that's, an incredible part of our team, that you do have that kind of a mentality when it comes to leadership and mentorship. And, it's a big part of who we are at Gensler.
Yeah, I think, it's kind of interesting hearing Kelly's take on some of that, as if she and I don't have enough time to catch up on our practice and everything. But it's fascinating. I think our co-CEOs, Andy and Diane, I know various times when Andy's talked, we at Gensler have collaborative leadership. And, as Andy's described it, it's about aces and spaces. We all have things that we're aces at and others that, are spaces. And when you put leadership together, you fill those spaces. And I think it's just kind of fascinating, because while I think there's a lot of similarities, I think there's a lot of things that Kelly does that are very different from me. And I think that is absolutely the perfect kind of thing for our team here in Chicago. Is, you have collaborative leadership, and it makes a much stronger because it's a leadership team at that point, as opposed to just, one person that people are looking toward.
Yeah.
Interesting. Of course, I'd never heard the phrase, aces and spaces, but I like it. I might, use it in my future conversations there. But Jackson, I love that anecdote when you talked about remembering the details, a photographic memory. So that might be yours, or you might have another one. But the next question would be for the both of you. What's something that you've learned in your career from a quality former leader that you've taken on board and sticks with you to this day?
Quality from a leader?
I don't know if I can answer it perfectly. I would say quality from a leader. That's maybe a little tough. I guess I'll try and answer it. I think, at least with how I try and behave as a leader, I try to emulate the things that I've thought were really great about folks that I've worked with, and to not do the things that when I was younger frustrated me to no end about certain folks, and their leadership styles. I try really hard not to do that. I think, especially in creative professions like this, people, even very early in their career, they need a fair amount of autonomy. And, of all possible things, micromanagement is one of those ones that just absolutely drives me out of my mind. So that's one that I try and never do. And maybe sometimes I'm a little too relaxed about it. But, that's maybe an example is, I try and not do the things that frustrated me as a young designer myself.
Yeah, I'd say something similar, just, giving people the space they need to grow and to figure some things out. Sometimes it's really hard when you see someone doing something a different way than you would do it. But, I'm definitely still, working on always kind of letting people, figure things out on their own before jumping in. If you totally see them going off, the edge of a cliff, of course you're gonna reel them back in. But I think that's something that I've definitely appreciated when I've been given that opportunity by past leaders, and been frustrated by when I didn't have in the past.
Got you. And for the two of you, was there a specific time when you noticed, I've now become a leader, or did it happen over time? And when did you first realize that you guys individually were leaders in this space?
When it actually happened versus when I may have realized it, we're probably separated by years. It probably happened significantly earlier than when I realized that it had. But I would say definitely organically.
Yeah, and I'd say that just kind of going back to what I had said earlier about, if you're looking at it as an opportunity for a title, like the title comes later, as more of a recognition of something you've already been doing. And I find that actually quite liberating, that you can step into a leadership role. You can kind of take the reins on that without being told, oh, you're now this leader. So, you know, I think when it probably started when I was a kid. When was it recognized? You know, at various stages. You know, you mentioned at the beginning that I'm the regional practice area leader for critical facilities. You know, that's relatively new for me. And there's still definitely things I'm learning and figuring out with respect to that. But I think it's ever evolving, ever changing, and that it's something that anyone can take on at any point in time at any level. I think is just freeing and liberating, and gives a lot of hope for, you know, the younger folks who might be listening to this podcast to, you know, kind of give them that permission to just go out and take it.
I think it will, or I hope it will. I'm going to put the two of you on the spot here. I think if the last question about, you know, a memory that from a former leader that stays with you to this day, if that was a challenge, this one might also be a challenge. And I'm going to encourage you both just to keep to one, because that's when it becomes most interesting. But if you can't keep to just one, then that's absolutely fine as well. But who is a quality former leader of yours that you really respect and have done, and why?
I can start with that one, just because we recently had a meeting with someone who was a former mentor of mine, Stephen Painter from our Toronto office. He's a principal there. And, you know, when I first met Stephen, I was like, who is this guy? You know, he was just kind of coming up with these like crazy ideas and, you know, really, you know, pushing people and pushing some buttons. And, you know, after some time and getting to know him on a more personal level, I was like, all right, yeah, who is this guy? You know, and it kind of turned from not knowing what was going on and, you know, where I could fit into this, to really seeing an opportunity to learn and grow, you know, not only from someone, but along with them. And to this day, he's someone that, you know, I'll tap, even though I'm no longer in the Toronto office, you know, hey, I've got something that I think we could connect on, or I'm really interested in something that you're doing. And without fail, anytime I've asked, you know, he'll show up. So, you know, I think that's someone that I really admire, you know, for, you know, his absolute brilliance, but also for, you know, how humble he remains and his willingness to help others.
There's so many that I could name. So to not forget anybody, I'll pick someone who's retired at this point. I spent about 3 years not living in our New York office area, but working with our New York team. And Jan Gross was one of the earliest pioneers in critical facilities, especially at Gensler. I think had been at Gensler since the 70s, and did some of our absolute earliest electronic trading, which is where critical facilities came from. Trading floors and things like that for the big banks and Wall Street and all that. That's kind of where the modern data center, at least in our mind, kind of came out of. And so Jan was a very, very early Gensler person who got critical facilities kind of going, and working with projects. We did some for some major hospitals, Cleveland Clinic, Mayo Clinic, and then for some major tech firms over those 3 years. It was just really a great experience, because I learned a lot, not just on the design side, but how to be smart about our interactions with clients and the engineers and the construction partners. And you know, I can picture sitting in his office with the Today Show filming below, because you could hear the Today Show filming from his window. And you know, it was just great, because he's another one of those folks who, you know, he may not have been on every single phone call or things like that, but we'd hop on a conference call, talk with the contractors, and, you know, kind of spitball costs of millwork for a reception desk in the lobby. And, you know, he was able to jump right in as though he had been in every single meeting that we had. And he was someone that, you know, really played a formative role in where I would go with critical facilities pretty early in my career.
Well, I know that's a challenging question. It always is, because there's so many people out there that could be, impactful leaders. So I appreciate you both giving me one there. Kelly, I might be wrong here, but Stephen Paynter, I don't know if it's the individual I saw. I saw an article about a Stephen with Gensler in Toronto who had created an algorithm for unused interior office space. Is that the same Stephen?
The same Stephen, absolutely. And that's actually something that, we're very interested in looking at for critical facilities as well.
Is that to, transfer or transform those facilities into critical facilities?
Looking at any type of, existing facility, I think there's huge potential there.
Awesome. Interesting. Now, that's kind of, covering the section on your own development and your own growth. Moving more into a focus on design can be quite free with these responses. But for the both of you, if you could design or build absolutely anything, money not being an issue, what would you be designing and what would you be building?
And can we remove clients from the list of potential issues? I would probably do residential. I don't
Really?
think, yeah,
Wow.
yeah, but that again goes to, if we could remove all those external forces, I would probably do residential, because I think it's a fascinating side of the industry. But I couldn't picture myself doing that in reality.
Yeah.
I like being on the commercial and corporate side of things.
It's not what I expected you to say.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool. I was expecting you to say something like crazy high-rise buildings.
Those would be cool, but I think some really, really amazing large format houses, out in Colorado or urban environments like Chicago or New York or something like that. I think there's a lot of fun, a lot of extremely high-end boutique design to it. There's just quite a few things that
one of the things I really love about my career today is that I have had the opportunity to work in a lot of different areas. And I wouldn't want to just like zoom in on one particular thing. Even, within critical facilities, we have so much opportunity to, we have like a broad range of things. But if there was like a single one-off project that I would enjoy doing, it would probably be something for foster youth, either some sort of like a cool like civic center or community center, or there are different housing facilities, transitional homes, for families that are reuniting. As a foster mom, that's something that's very near and dear to me, and that would just be another way to bring some of my passions and gifts together.
Interesting. I should make it clear that if there's anyone out there in residential practices or civic practices, that Kelly and Jackson are not available, and that they are focused in their work in critical facilities. But thanks for that. Kelly, these next couple are for you. But over the last 8 years with Gensler, what's the fate, just because you've had a bit of a diverse background on projects, what's your favorite project that you've been a part of, and what was your role in that project?
Oh, that's a good question. And there've been so many. I think one of my favorite ones, just because of like all the things that I learned from it, was a project I worked on in Toronto for Holt Renfrew. So that was just cool. It was retail, and we did this like small cafe and a washroom renovation. So it wasn't anything like really like sexy, but it was I learned a lot through that. There were a lot of things that went wrong on the project, not like wrong in the sense that the design was horrible, but just things pop up in construction, and I had to come up with solutions that you wouldn't ordinarily. So I really loved that. Another project that I really enjoyed was while I was working for another firm. I was down in Dallas at the time, and I had a small role on the Burj Vista Towers, and that was really cool, just because it was kind of like in the span of 3 days. I took like all of they've been working in AutoCAD, So I took all of those CAD drawings and translated it into Revit. It was a quick burn exercise, but it helped us see issues that we couldn't otherwise see, with just those 2D plans. So, it was a really great learning experience for me, and one that allowed me to show other people something that I could do that they didn't know yet. So those would be
Interesting.
two that I learned a lot from.
And then, two that you've learned a lot from, and then in that same vein, what's something that you're particularly proud of in your career that you don't tend to get to talk about a very lot?
Well, I mean, I think, across critical facilities projects, these are projects that, as I said earlier, they can't fail, and they have a huge impact, and in that they're significant. Every project, every client is important. But some of these projects really do help grow, different regions. They provide access and equity to people who otherwise wouldn't have that. And that's something I'm really proud of that I don't think we talk enough about.
Good point now. And then Jackson, for you, as a leader of this group, what's something that your team is currently working on that you find particularly impressive and particularly noteworthy, understanding that you might not be able to share all of the information, but to what you can share, what do you find particularly impressive and noteworthy that your team is working on right now?
Well, I think we want to kind of go away from projects because, as you mentioned, there's a lot of sensitivity to the type of work we do. And there are some pretty amazing things we're doing project-wise. But I think probably if we look at it more from an industry-wide, practice area-wide stance, I think what we're trying to do, and I don't just mean our team in Chicago, all around Gensler, and not even just critical facilities, but our firm as a whole, with 2030 approaching and various goals that different clients have, that Gensler has, that different municipalities, governments, et cetera, have around reduction of carbon. I think that we're doing some pretty tremendous things, whether it's trying to help customers reduce their embodied carbon, through how we update our spec templates. And that's not something that just applies to data centers. Getting to net zero really is going to be an important thing for the entire design and construction industry, not just data centers. I think data centers come to the forefront a lot because of the consumption of electricity and water. Part of trying to be more carbon neutral and reduce the operational carbon side of things, any reductions we can do in electricity are going to trickle down to reductions in the required cooling. And as we know, water is not exactly the most abundant resource in a lot of parts of the world. So there's a lot of benefit that I think improving the sustainability of data centers is going to have. So I think there's a lot of excitement around that. We're very committed as a firm to achieving net zero carbon. And I think a lot of our clients, it's inspiring to see that a lot of the large, in particular the tech firms and some of the large co-location providers, people have established that they're going to be carbon neutral. We have less than 7 years to get there. So it's going to be an exciting 7 years.
Well, I think, I'm definitely seeing that trend with more and more people focused in sustainability and net zero. But if, Gensler, the world's largest and leading architecture firm, can make that commitment as well, then I'd hope that we'd see other design firms also, take your lead in that. So that's an overview of a design approach and design preferences. Moving on again into goals and upcoming motivations. For the both of you, what were your goals when you first started out? Have you achieved those goals? And how have those goals changed over time?
Well, I mean, I know when I first started out, my goal was become licensed. And then I became licensed, and it was like, well, nothing really changed. And I think that's okay. I think, you know, the funny thing about goals is that they kind of are this, you know, moving target. And, you know, I sometimes, you know, joke that, you know, my goal is to always have something to be chasing after. But it's really true. And I think, you know, as long as things are changing and evolving and there are opportunities to help grow our team, to, you know, grow my own knowledge and experiences, you know, I think I'm always achieving something then.
My goal as a child, and I'm probably very unique in this aspect. We'd come to Chicago on, you know, short vacations and stuff like that. My goal as a child was to one day work in the Loop and eat lunch at the Berghoff, which is like just a block away from our office. And so I guess in that regard, I lived that 8-year-old goal that I work in the Chicago Loop, and for a full year, actually, I ate at the Berghoff for lunch. But I mean, in reality, you know, architecture education, you know, is it's a shared experience that we all have, regardless of what university we went to. It's a unique education that usually is kind of a very classical foundation that sometimes stems from the Beaux Arts to the Bauhaus to others. And so it's something all of us in this industry, you know, can reflect back on. And, you know, when you're in architecture school, a lot of our projects are things like museums and libraries. They're these amazing cultural projects that we don't necessarily do day in, day out. And you know, a lot of folks will become sole practitioners. A lot will work at small and mid-sized firms. And, you know, a decent amount will come to large firms. And I don't know when I was in school where I thought the right fit would be. I think if I had to guess around the time I graduated, I probably would have thought that I would have been in a mid-sized firm in a relatively mid-sized market. You know, sometimes the idea of going to a world-class city like Chicago and a very large firm can be overwhelming, but from the moment I got here, it just kind of seemed like a natural fit. And I think what's kind of amazing is to look back and say, like, okay, well, you know, have you achieved your goals? Yeah, I think so. I'm not sure what the goals were, but it feels pretty good. Sometimes it's a challenge and sometimes it's a struggle, but I have a hard time picturing doing things different and being in a different place than here.
Yeah, I mean, I think what's just important is always to stay open-minded, and you know, for anyone who's, you know, maybe following, you know, along, who's thinking about entering the industry or looking for opportunities, you know, I think people get kind of bogged down by trying to like come up with their 5-year plan. And I don't know, I kind of think that anyone who says they actually have a 5-year plan is maybe pulling your leg a bit. I think, you know, being able to evolve and change and adapt and grow, you know, is what makes someone successful in this industry. And I think that's something that, you know, everyone should be trying to focus on. And you know, maybe you wind up looking back and you're like, what were my goals? What were those things that I was setting out to achieve? And maybe that's actually the best outcome, is to look back and say, well, you know, I've achieved a lot and I'm continuing to achieve a lot. And I didn't necessarily have to, you know, check a bunch of boxes off.
I think for those still listening, I think that'll be really helpful for them to kind of listen from two leaders like yourself, you know, and kind of what your goals were and the moving targets. I think it's really helpful for those to listen to. Lastly, you know, Kelly, I know that there is the GAP program, and I wonder perhaps if you wanted to go into a little bit more detail there. But I just wanted to know, for those still listening, if they wanted to learn a little bit more about Gensler, or just get a little bit more information, what can they do? Where can they reach out to?
Well, they can go to Gensler.com. And you know, we have a lot of practices beyond just critical facilities. I think we have about 34 today. And you know, in the experience menu on Gensler, you'll find critical facilities, and there's information about the work we've done. There's thought leadership pieces, various articles, blog posts, etc. And then there's some bios with contact information, if it's something that warrants a follow-up.
Mhm.
And
And
Kelly,
we're on various other social media too.
Yeah, we're everywhere.
we will definitely be sharing the website, the social media, your guys' profiles as well. But given that we do speak with many junior professionals, that Gensler Apprentice program, Kelly, that I believe you head up, would you mind going into a little bit more detail just so those can hear what that's about as well?
Absolutely. So the Gensler Apprenticeship Program, or GAP, is a program for individuals who maybe aren't on the traditional education track to entering the design industry. The idea there is that not everyone is, going to excel in the classroom setting, or not everyone necessarily wants to be on that track. And that doesn't mean that they don't have what it takes to excel in the industry. And so we developed a program, and it's a framework for individuals to get started in the industry, learn the tools and knowledge that they would need to, have a successful start to their careers. One thing that I'm very proud of with that program is that there are over 85 individuals here at Gensler, both past and present, who have contributed to this program and the creation of the program in some way. And, what that really says is, the power of being at a big firm, and the support that you get out of, such a large global network. I always love to tell people, like, I've never been told no at Gensler. And I don't know if that's just because people know I won't take no for an answer. Or, what I'd like to think is that, everyone is really here to help support people when they have a great idea. And GAP started out just as a really simple idea, that we wanted to train people through on the job, experiential learning. And we do take the best elements of experiential learning from different industries and bring it into this program. And we're currently running our pilot. We have 4 gappers, as we like to call them, in that program. And I'm just so excited to see where it goes, and to see where they grow in their career.
For anyone still listening, if you do come from that background, I'd encourage you to connect with Kelly. As I said, I will be sharing both Jackson and Kelly's profile when we release this podcast. Now, I know that Jackson and Kelly have got meetings and busy days coming up, so whilst I could keep you both for another hour, I'm afraid I will be letting you go, but I really appreciate you both coming on this podcast, and I hope people do reach out and learn from the two of you. I think it'll be really helpful. But for now, have a great day, and I appreciate you coming on the podcast, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.